Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Warwick F1 Show pod. I'm your host for this one, Anwar. This is the 33rd episode of the Warwick F1 Show, and we have started the summer shutdown in the F1 sport, I guess. All the factories have been shut down outside of a few small departments like legal and financial teams of the constructors. So nothing's going on. But the F1 podcast, the F1 Warwick F1 Show pod, continues. And given that we are at the de facto halfway stage of the championship, I think it's time for us to have a check-in to what our expectations were going into the season, and has this season met at those kind of hopes. I'm your host for this one, Anwar. Like I said, I'm joined by three guests this time. So my two co-hosts are here, Daniel and Lucy, and Vignesh has returned once again. So I want to thank all three of them for coming on. So the format I want to go through just to begin with will be just us looking at what were our hopes, just define what they were and have we got them, and then we'll go through a team-by-team basis, assessing have they overperformed or underperformed based on those. So let's get this show on the road. Daniel, let's start with you. What was your hopes for this season going into Australia, which was our first race weekend of the season?
I'll be honest, I got swept up in the hype, Anwar. I mean, everyone was saying it was going to be McLaren versus Ferrari. You know, Max Verstappen's obviously going to be there because he's Max Verstappen. We're going to get Mercedes finally figuring out what they're doing with their car. You know, 9-way championship battle. I mean, yeah. In that respect, it was probably very unrealistic. McLaren were on a dominant trajectory at the end of last year. So, from that perspective, if you want to say it's under-delivered, then fine, but it was never really going to deliver that in the first place. At least we do have a championship battle. Thank goodness Oscar Piastri stepped his level up. Lando Norris has been struggling a little bit, so it's added a lot of things to talk about on our podcast, which we are currently recording because they can't shut us down, which is good. I love free speech. But yeah, that was my main expectation, is what we all want to see. You know, I'd settle for a Constructors' Championship fight. That's certainly not happening. But we're verging into pessimism territory again. I think overall it has delivered about, I'd say, 80% of what I wanted it to. We've had some great races, Silverstone and Australia especially, some wet weather thrillers, which you always seem to get at the end of a regulation cycle. I'm thinking 2021, obviously. 2012, and it was also quite good for that. So in that respect, I'm enjoying it at this mid-season break.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very difficult not to get swept up into any type of hype at the beginning of a sports season. I always get it in football. This season is going to be the best season ever. And I think we had the exact same thing in Formula One with the Lewis Hamilton move. That only added to the anticipation. Verstappen having to, I guess, fight to win that last championship, even though we had a bit of an advantage. Yeah, that as the backdrop, McLaren's rise to prominence as well. So I think it had all the ingredients to be an absolute thriller. Unfortunately, I think, Vignesh, would you say that a few teams have disappointed us, barring McLaren?
Yeah, I feel like a lot of teams have dropped the ball in terms of taking the fight to McLaren. As you mentioned, the fact that Lewis moved from Mercedes to Ferrari is such a big move, probably the biggest we've seen in Formula One history. And the hopes that we had with a 5-way title fight, in my opinion, at least between the two McLarens, two Ferrari drivers, and Max Verstappen, it's definitely been a letdown. And a lot of questions need to be asked for the teams, especially Ferrari, given how close of a constructors fight we had heading into the final race in Abu Dhabi, where there was a storyline that Charles Leclerc was starting from the back of the grid because of his qualifying mistake, and then having to take an engine penalty, and then only falling short of the constructors by 14 points or something like that. And then the fact that they were replacing one of the best drivers in form in Carlos Sainz with Lewis Hamilton, and then hoping that they would continue that fight into 2025. It's definitely been a letdown, and hopefully we see a complete reset of it in 2026. But pretty much every team bar McLaren has definitely fallen a step short or two. In the midfield, it's a different story, perhaps, but otherwise the top teams have definitely taken a step back.
Yeah, and I think a saving grace for this was the fact that McLaren have been very open to letting their drivers fight. And I think that's something that a lot of people make a lot of stuff about the PIR rules and all the rest of it, but they've let them battle. Lucy, would you say that the McLarens themselves have been good at battling? Have they been the ones who have who provided us the majority of the entertainment this season so far?
I mean, at the front, definitely. I'd say the McLarens have been the ones providing a lot of the entertainment. And also, let's not forget that while the Red Bull isn't really up there as much, Verstappen has been up there. He's won a couple of races. And so that's also provided some excitement. But yeah, really, it is the McLarens fighting and McLaren having two very evenly matched drivers in terms of how they're performing this season. Basically means that compared to Red Bull, where it was effectively just Verstappen winning a lot, when even though McLaren is very dominant over other teams, it hasn't quite felt so. I don't want to say boring because it's F1, it's never boring, but less.
Less indeed. I think, like Danny mentioned, we've had some good races over the course of this season, right? I think Silverstone was a very good one. Australia was a good one. Hungary was also pretty good as well. Even though it was a different type of race, I particularly enjoyed that. Overall, what would we say the season so far, if we had to put a rating on it, what number would we associate? Because I would personally say this is so far the season been a 6.
I'm going to say 6.5. I think when I compare it to, I'd say this time last year, it hadn't been quite so interesting. And in terms of the overall season battle, maybe it's a little bit lower. But I also think if you consider, like, even the last place team, which is Alpine, obviously, because it's Alpine, but even they're currently got, like, the record for the most number of points scored by the team in last place, and we're only halfway through the season. The midfield fight's been cracking. We've had some very rogue shouts for P4s, P5s, podiums, and in part that is because the top teams have dropped the ball. But it has made it really interesting, even though the kind of the title fight for constructors right at the top is most definitely not a real fight. So I'd say 6.5, maybe even a 7.
Daniel, how about you? So we've had a 6. We've had Lucy lean to a 7. Where will you place this?
I may as well continue with the trend and go for an integer, which is 7. Kind of going up in increments. I think, it is. We've neglected to mention, but Lucy kind of touched on it there. It is the closest season in Formula One history in qualifying in Hungary in Q3, the top 10 only. So, like, in certain circumstances, in different lights, it looks like a great season. And it is a good season. 7 is not bad. I think 6 is a little harsh, personally, because, it looks like this fight's going down to the wire between the McLaren drivers, that you cannot choose who's going to be at the top of the midfield, which has been hell for our predictions. As anyone who tunes in regularly will probably know, we did do horribly in Hungary, partially because of that, but also because these top teams are, when things don't go their way, they are slipping back into the midfield, and that is because of how close this championship is. And, that's mostly what I want from Formula One. On the whole, I'm a pretty neutral fan in terms of fan allegiance, but what I do want is a close challenge, a close fight. I like close racing. I like close championship fights. And I think we've had a decent amount of that. Obviously, there are issues with this year's cars, particularly surrounding dirty air, and the Formula One teams deciding they want to ruin any chance of racing that we could possibly have. But in spite of that, we have had some decent battles, so we can't complain a whole lot. Some tracks just aren't helpful for that kind of racing, but I don't think a 7's. I think a 7's pretty fitting for what we've seen so far. But it could easily stretch to an 8 if things start to heat up later in the year.
And lastly, Vignesh, where would you put it? We had a 6, a 6.5 or 7. Are you going to go 7.5 and follow the trend, or are we sticking within that range?
I think it's been that great a season to give it a 7.5. Personally, I'd give your rating of a 6 because we've had some spicy moments within the top teams. You've seen some spectacular qualifying performances. Max putting Red Bull on pole a couple of times, George Russell winning. In terms of taking the fight to McLaren, there's been good races. I think the midfield fights have been more interesting than the fight for wins. I think the fact that we've only seen pretty much both the McLarens dominate most of the races speaks in terms of entertainment value. As Danny mentioned, I'm glad we're having at least a title fight this year. I would say it's getting closer to a 2016 situation, but it's not reached that level of toxicity yet. Let's see if it reaches there or not. But so far, it's been mellow. Maybe just for the entertainment factor, hopefully reaches that boiling point, and we see, Piastri throwing a hat at Lando Norris. I don't know if it'll ever happen, but I'd love to see it in the cooldown room. But yeah, I think the fact that a couple of the top teams have fallen back, it's definitely not half the case. But as you mentioned, the midfield being closer to the top teams in terms of qualifying and then challenging them in the races where it's difficult to overtake is definitely up the entertainment value. If we have more, let's say if we have more Brazil 2024 S races for the rest of the season, then my rating would be probably closer to a 7 or 8. But so far, what the season has to offer, I'd definitely give it a 6.
I just think we've had a couple more boring races this season, which is why I've assessed it as a 6. But let's go on to assessing where we think teams are at the moment, because we're at the mid-season. It's probably where we can make a good judgment as to how different teams have performed. I want to start going in reverse order. So we're going to start with Alpine, who have scored 20 points. They are 10th in the constructors. It's very rare to see, and I think it's credence to the ideas that Danny was saying about the closest F1 season in history, because we've got the worst constructor in the grid with 20 points, which is, a figure that normally midfield teams are at. If we look at who those 20 points have been earned by, all of them have been by Pierre Gasly, Colapinto, and Doohan, who obviously lost a seat early on. Neither of them have achieved any points this season. Starting with you, Vignesh, Alpine, where do we assess their season? Have they overperformed, underperformed? Where would you place them?
Giving them anything other than underperform would be a crime in my opinion. It's been an absolute mess in terms of Alpine management, and it's no surprise given how many times they've changed team principals over the years and how many times they've changed drivers. I feel bad given how like Colapinto is performing. I almost feel bad for Jack doing like he isn't doing that. He was off the pace of Pierre Gasly, but like I don't see the same Colapinto that was there at Williams towards the end of last year, where he was quite close to Alex Albon and getting points on a couple of occasions. So, and the fact that they had a promising team principal in Ollie Oaks, and he had his own personal issues. Of course, I think there's probably a reason why he probably got replaced by Flavio, and then him coming back from the sport. Overall, it's been a mess, and the fact they're switching to Merc engines next year clearly shows that they have zero faith in their own engine manufacturing department. It couldn't be. It's probably one of the worst ways to end a regulation cycle. And props should be given to Pierre Gasly for getting points wherever possible. I think P6 or P7 Bahrain was one of his best results. So he's been having a really underrated season. And in my opinion, I feel like he deserves a better seat. But if Alpine are able to fix their mess for next year, then maybe we can see a bit of the old 2021 Pierre Gasly, where he was constantly in top 5, top 6. But otherwise, in general, it's been an absolute nightmare for anyone working in Alpine this season.
Danny, do you agree with that sentiment? Because, like you mentioned, Vignesh mentioned, we've had Ollie Oates. He resigned in May, and then Briatore has taken over. Steve Nielsen has been recently announced as the managing director of Alpine. Is this a season of transition for them, do you think? And also, my follow-up question is, do you think they've been unlucky with how competitive other teams have made it in the midfield? Because 20 points isn't that bad for this point in the season if you're a midfield team.
I'm just going to answer your second point right away. The answer is no. It's Alpine's fault that they are last in the constructors. The turbulence would be the right word to describe it. Obviously, that revolving door of team principles. And the issue with that is when you don't get consistency across who is in the management positions, they don't get to exercise their vision. Often, one team principal's vision can be enough to get a team to the top. But if they don't have time to execute it and put it into place, it gets confused with other people's visions who get implemented into the team, and that happens to be very different, and that makes for a very confused, quite patchy, torn apart team in that respect. And a similar thing with the second driver. I mean, Jack Doohan, you could probably find him still moping around the Alpine motorhome. I think he's had a tough break, hasn't he? Getting replaced with Franco Colapinto, who was far from impressed. I mean, he certainly didn't impress in the tyre test in Hungary. I think it was Tuesday or Wednesday. He had that crash, and I don't think I've ever heard of a driver crashing during tyre testing for Pirelli. In the midweek, out of nowhere, there was a picture of the car. It looked pretty messed up. So, Colapinto certainly hasn't delivered on that promise that he showed last year, but neither have Alpine. It's quite an undignified send-off for the Renault engine, as Vignesh said. It was quite unceremonious. But who knows? Maybe Alpine will bring it back and into the annual Alpine podiums we've come to expect for 4 out of the last 5 years. Maybe it will vault them into a miraculous midfield finish. But on the whole, I'm not expecting that at all. To be honest, it's been pretty torrid for them. Early on, they were actually affected by the Chinese Grand Prix technical directive about the rear wings, which reduced their competitiveness, and since then they've kind of spiraled. Pierre Gasly's done a great job. P6 in Silverstone was great, and in Bahrain he qualified P4, so he's just up to his usual tricks. But a shame. Wasted.
Let's move on to the next team here, which is Haas, who are in 9th position. Now, Haas have got 35 points this season, and unlike Alpine, they've had contribution from both drivers. Ollie Behrman being the rookie driver, and Esteban Ocon, who was kind of the established figure in F1, not necessarily at the team. But let's go through this here, because if we look at the points, they got 35, like I mentioned, 27 of which have come from Esteban Ocon. But Daniel, do you think that Ocon has been by far and away the better driver over Ollie Behrman, who's got 8 points? Or do we think it's begun to even up between the two in terms of performance?
No, I'm pretty sure Ocon still has quite an edge on Ollie Behrman, who's had quite a scrappy season, to be honest. 18th in the championship when Ocon's 9th doesn't look too good. Behrman's only scored 2 points since he scored in Bahrain, which was from P20 on the grid quite impressively. And those 2 points that he's scored since then were in the Belgian Grand Prix, in the Belgian sprint race, sorry. So it's been a drought, to say the least, for Ollie Behrman. And in the meantime, he's been getting involved in incidents, to say the least. He's on 8 penalty points now. I mean, overtaking under red flags and crashing under red flags are some of the biggest no-nos in Formula One, and he's done them both in practice sessions this year, which is rough. So, to be honest, I think he might be the only rookie who's actually having a rookie-like season, in that he's making loads of mistakes, and quite costly ones, but there are flashes of pace, and he is quick. And lots of P11 finishes, which at a point they tend to become kind of unlucky. To just notch them up 4 in a row is a shame for him. But Haas have made the word cameo seem quite apt this year, in that their pace has been very inconsistent and they just pop up out of nowhere. Their strategies are anonymous. They're never leading the race on a bold one stop or something. They did score almost half their points tally in China, then just kind of vanish off the map. And obviously, because development's kind of stopped now for this year, I'm not expecting anything more for the rest of the season.
So would you say this is like par for the course for Haas, or an underperforming season?
I think it's a slight underperformance, especially given the introduction of Ayo Komatsu last year at Haas. What he managed to do, maybe it was just because they downplayed expectations hugely going into last year, but they properly delivered on any promise that people thought they might have, under promise, over deliver, that sort of thing. So from that perspective, P9 in the championship is not where they wanted to be, but there's a dawn next year and a brand new day that they can look forward to.
Lucy, do you agree with the sentiment of Daniel saying this is a slight underperformance from Haas? And do you think that they're kind of setting up themselves for 26 more so?
Yeah, I think that Haas, compared to last year, will have thought that they've underperformed. I think that they're definitely in a stage where they're setting up for next year. I think while Ocon's a very experienced driver, there is something to be said for the fact that Haas have gone into this year with a whole new driver lineup. And so compared to the last time that they did that, it's gone quite well for them. But I think, I'm sure we'll talk to it more when we talk about it more, that when we get onto even more people. But I think the Ollie Behrman thing has kind of shown that kind of Doohan and Colapinto being the exceptions, the rookies this year have had a really good year. Like when we talk about Haas underperforming, we're talking about Haas not meeting the expectations they might have wanted for themselves or might have set themselves up for after last year. This is by no means sort of a rookie who's come into the sport and is floundering, or Ocon who's come over from Alpine and is struggling to find his feet. This is just an uber competitive field that has being near the bottom of it. I agree that China maybe gave false illusions as to how good they might be coming so early. A bit like how I thought that Sauber might have done that after Australia when they actually got some points. But no, I think Haas have underperformed. But I don't think it's nothing really to do with, it's not like Alpine where there's been clear things going wrong. Like this is, Alpine and Haas are in completely different categories. It kind of does a disservice to Haas that they're sitting next to Alpine on the table right now.
Yeah, I mean, Vignesh, do you agree with everything that's been said? It's probably a slight underperformance, but given the kind of new driver lineup, it was something that we can expect from them.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to expect a rookie to come in and like perform to the levels of Esteban Ocon, who's a seasoned veteran at this point. And the fact that he had a very bad ending with Alpine, it must have been good for Ocon to come to a healthier environment with Ayo Komatsu at the helm of Haas. And given how they performed last year, it was quite good. I mean, yeah, compared to last year, definitely it's definitely been a slight underperformance. But then again, the car has been inconsistent, as Daniel mentioned this year. Sometimes they don't understand why they're good in qualifying one weekend, and then the next weekend they're horrible in qualifying. But then they make their way up the grid with their good race pace. So they have had issues understanding why their car is so volatile in terms of quality and race pace performances. And I would say, in my opinion, it's an unpopular shout, but they've kind of gotten a like replacement. Like Ocon's the replacement for Hulkenberg in terms of gathering the points, whereas Behrman has been a bit more chaotic in terms of collecting penalty points. So he's taken the mantle of Kevin Magnussen from last year. Hopefully, Behrman doesn't get a race ban. Being an FD Academy product, I'm slightly biased towards Behrman, but hopefully he doesn't end up getting a race ban. But yeah, it's a bit interesting to see him collect penalty points with those kind of incidents in Silverstone and Monaco. I feel like sometimes he's been really unlucky. I think there's one qualifying in Imola where I believe he crossed the line and got that lap in, but the FIA deemed it otherwise. So it's been an up and down season. Normally, what you'd expect from a rookie. Hopefully, I mean, as you said, like they probably should shift their focus to 2026 and just try to accumulate the maximum number of points as they can, given that they're not the best when it comes to having a strong financial budget. So let's see what they have to offer the rest of the season.
I also just have one last thing to add, which is that while Behrman has had, and Haas are underperforming, Behrman's got like the longest ever streak of P11 finishes. This is not a team who are in second to last place and are picking up points because cars ahead of them are just because cars ahead of them are DNFing, or a team who is struggling to get out of Q1, struggling to get out of P15 and P16 on race day. they have their competitive moments, and it's kind of like if points went down to P11, like we'd be talking about like how consistent they are in point scoring.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not the most typical season where you have a very clear set of teams near the bottom. It's been very up and down and has actually been a beacon of consistency in some way. Just unfortunately, most of the time being a beacon of consistency just outside the points. Let's start to pick up the pace a bit whilst we go through some of these lower teams. The next team on the list is Racing Bulls, who've got 45 points and have had 3 drivers, just like LP. They've had Yuki Tsunoda in there, you've had Liam Lawson in there too, and you've got Isaac Hadjar who's been there the entire season. With 45 points, I think I would probably, I was going to guess and say this has probably been unexpected or maybe a slight overperformance from them. Danny, would you say the same or not?
I would. I am slightly surprised that they're P8 in the championship, given that they seem to have had a consistently good car at a lot of tracks this year. Obviously, early on, they threw away a couple of quite a few points in China with some woeful strategy calls. But yeah, they've returned to their roots, really, by fielding 2 rookies instead of a 35-year-old Australian and an overperformer. And it's paid off. I think Hadjar's been a rookie revelation. He's come a long way since the Melbourne Formation Lap. He's been able more often than not to get points out of the car. He qualified P6 in Monaco, which is a highlight. And, you know, people say he's been off the boil recently. I'm not sure that's entirely true. He's had some reliability gremlins in Austria and Belgium, for example, and strategy woes in Canada and Hungary. So I don't think his pace has gone away exactly. I don't think he's struggling per se. He's just not had the best run, hasn't been able to put it all together. A bit like Carlos Sainz, really. And Lawson, you know, obviously it was a slow start, but he has been on the up and up, on the pace since Monaco, really, and on a run of consecutive P8 finishes, which, if he just continues that for the rest of the year, is going to stand him in good stead with the team and going forward into the next few years.
Vignesh, do you think that Hadjar has been the most impressive rookie this season?
Probably, yeah. I mean, as Danny mentioned, maybe I'm guilty of it. Guilty of assuming that Hatch has been performing poorly the last few races when he's had issues with his reliability or like poor strategies. I think overall, yeah, given how his season started off in Melbourne and to bounce back from that, it takes a lot of mental strength. And like when like Lawson was finding his feet after being demoted from Red Bull, he was on who's constantly picking up points and keeping the team quite up in the midfield battles. So he's definitely been the rookie of the season so far. And yeah, hopefully, like as soon as RB sorts out their reliability issues or strategy issues which plagued them at the start of the season, I think we can see more from him and Liam Lawson as well.
Yeah, Lucy, just before we move on to Racing Bull, because there isn't much else to say, I want to move on. I want to talk a little bit on the season in terms of the organisation. They had Lauren Meckies at the start of the season, and now they've got Alan Permain at the head of that team as well now, because Meckies has gone to greener pastures on the other side of the Red Bull kind of family. Do we think that they're looking forward to the rest of the season? Do you expect Racing Wolves to still be in 8th, or do we expect them to be fighting up a little bit higher up in the constructors?
I mean, I reckon Red Bull might get a few more points finishes. No, I reckon RB will get a few more good points finishes this year. I can't see any reason for their consistency to be dropping off. Obviously, Permain hasn't been in for very long, only a couple of races, but there's already a pretty consistent, it seems to be pretty consistent, and he was within the team beforehand, so he does know how it operates, and he has been part of their success so far. I think, to be honest, you say Lauren Meckies has left for greener pastures, I'd probably be at RB right now, but that's just me. But no, I think RB might climb further up the table. They might not, but that won't fundamentally be because of a massive change in their performance. You know, it's so close, it'll probably be dependent on how other teams are doing as to whether there's space for them to climb up the table or whether they keep increasing their points, but everyone else around them does as well. So yes and no, but kind of, I suspect them to keep being consistent. And, you know, Hadjar has just had an absolute stormer of a season. I think not only we've talked obviously about Melbourne a bit, but I think also the fact that I, to be honest, thought that when Sonoda left for Red Bull, that him having to basically step into the leadership of the team after only two races. Was it 2 races? Yeah, it was 2 races. After only 2 races there, might be a bit much for him. But he's really flourished, and that might be a testament to the fact that RB is a good place to build your confidence. We've seen it before with drivers, really kind of Ricciardo's sort of the anomaly there in terms of going to RB, not building his confidence. But it's a good team, but also he's a very good driver, and I'm glad some of the talent that he showed in F2 is getting a chance to be seen in F1 now.
100%. Now let's move on to another team where I think all three of us will agree they've overperformed this season, and that is the gambling team, the Stake F1, Kick Sauber. Depends what track we're at, to be honest. But the point is, the car that looks like an Xbox on wheels has performed incredibly well this season compared to our expectations. Daniel, we have mentioned on the podcast a few times how I have a bit of a dislike towards them. And they have kind of proven me wrong, haven't they?
Yes, they have. I'm very glad of it as well, because they've been the midfield highlight of this season, I'd say, especially with the Silverstone podium. I mean, Hulkenberg got a podium before Hamilton, for goodness sake. Austria and Great Britain were very promising.
Who would have put that on their bingo card?
Yeah, I mean, not me, that's for sure. But yeah, just both the drivers have been rock solid. I mean, Bortoleto, I'd call him an executioner because he's just great at executing. I mean, all 3 times that he's got through to Q3, he's scored points from them. He's just converted them quietly, calmly. You don't really hear him getting too het up on the radio. There was that time that Kimi Antonelli put him in the wall at Monaco and he threatened to do the same thing back. But apart from that, it's been, very impressive from Bortoleto. His pedigree is showing through it's good to see. Obviously, he's winning the qualifying head-to-head compared to Hulkenberg, who actually hasn't made it through to Q3 this season, which is a bit funny, unexpectedly. I mean, every single time that Hulkenberg scored points, it's been from outside the top 10, which is wild. But it just shows, the tightness of the field, how great a racer Hulkenberg is. I don't know what's happened to that qualifying form, but Bortoleto certainly found his. And he was getting criticism by journalists earlier in the season for not having points, of course. But, P6 in Hungary kind of sets the tone. He won't be facing those anymore. He's really made his mark, I think. Well done, Sauber.
Well done indeed. Vignesh, what was your opinion of Kick prior to the season? Do you expect them to be languishing in 10th position comfortably, or were you a rare person who saw hope in that team?
I was expecting them to be dead last in my opinion. I'm happy for the team. Seeing how they struggle the last few years and seeing Bottas finish his potentially his final season F1. We don't know what's going to happen with the Cadillac. Pointless was definitely a sad sight, but to see them bounce back from the last 2 seasons to now having a podium with Nico Hulkenberg, it's definitely been a surprise, and I'm glad the team is heading in a positive direction. Even though, as you mentioned, I don't like the fact that it looks like an Xbox. So that's something that we both agree on. And it's good to see Gabriel flourish as well. As you mentioned, the media was critical of the fact that he was not able to score points. But the fact is, when you don't have a car underneath you, it's difficult to show what you're capable of. And the fact that they have a decent car now, and both the drivers are able to get points when they get into Q3, or Nico starting from the back of the grid and getting a podium. It shows that they have a good car, and hopefully they can translate it into 2026. And credit has to be given to Jonathan Wheatley and Mattia Binotto. I've been critical of Binotto as a team principal for Ferrari. I don't think he's ever been a great team principal, but he's a very good technical director. His time at Ferrari when Michael Schumacher was dominating, it clearly shows he had a role to play in that team. And I feel like some of his influence is rubbing off. So has Jonathan Wheatley. Ever since he's left Red Bull, I feel like he's been a really good team principal. The way he's gone about setting up that team and bringing that team in the right direction. I feel like a lot of those factors have played a role, and hopefully we can see more of the same for 2025 and heading into 2026.
Yeah, and you know what? For a team that have had, like you mentioned, a few changes in the leadership department, they had Anwar Seidel, who was only there for not too for wasn't there for a long time, and the fact they've settled on it, and who they want to lead that team, and Bonotto and Jonathan Wheatley, who are both established members in the paddock, I think they're on a good path forward, and I think Audi have got themselves a pretty solid team to build off come 2026. So I'm excited to see what happens with them going forward. Let's move on to the next team on the grid, because we've gone through four. It's in the depths of the midfield battle at the moment, and the next team to go through is Aston Martin. Now, Aston Martin are a team that have not been near the same level that they showed in 2023, where Alonso was able to secure podiums upon podiums. But has this been an overperformance from our expectations, which kind of took a hit, Daniel? Took a hit last year, and we saw them consistently downgrade their car.
Well, I think it has been a season of two halves for Aston Martin, especially for Fernando Alonso. The first half of the season probably wasn't an overperformance, except on Lance Stroll's part, which is a weird thing to say. But the next, especially Hungary, was definitely an overperformance from what I expect. P5 and P7 in, a car that has had its issues in development, and in a team that are now switching focus, or have been switching focus for a long time, is crucial. They seem to have fixed their wind tunnel correlation issues that they were suffering with in 2023, which is key as well. And that's going to stand them in good stead for not just the rest of the year, but the next couple of years as well, if it stays that way. Alonso he did have a rough start to the season, didn't he? It kind of, the upgrade package in Imola really made it so that no amount of bad luck could really deny him points anymore, because he was, of course, self-quoted as the unluckiest driver in the world. He did have a few incidents in the early part of the year, but since then he's just been mega. And Lance Stroll's been like a Canadian Jack in the Box, in that he's going to pop up at some point, but you're never really sure when, and he's just kind of come out of nowhere and be strong. I genuinely thought he might end up with more points this year than Fernando Alonso, but they are now tied on 26 points, I think it is. So it's going down to the wire. Obviously, Australia was the highlight, P6 in those wet conditions. But, he's also had races like Canada where he finished 10 places behind Alonso. So it swings and roundabouts for Lance Stroll, as it always has been. But overall, I think it's been stronger than expected, at least on my part, for Aston Martin.
Yeah, Vignesh, do you agree with what Daniel was saying in terms of although Alonso particularly had a tough start to the season, Stroll was able to pick up the slack in a way that we probably wouldn't have expected.
Yeah, Alonso had a horrible run of luck this start of the season when he was putting the car in decent places, and the fact the car let him down. I think in Monaco was probably one of the highlights in terms of putting the car in a good position, and then having to retire from the race must have definitely taken a toll on his moral. But he kept going, and on the occasions where Fernando's car bailed on him, Lance was able to pop up with solid performances, Australia being a notable one. I feel like that's been the case for Lance for the last 5 years. It's an unpopular take, but he's never been the most consistent driver, but on an occasion or two, we'd see him pop up in the top 10, have decent performances. Even 2023, the start season when the car was quite clearly his second quickest, he had decent performances, but as the car went back in terms of upgrades, or they were slow compared to the rest of the field, he just completely disappeared. So I feel like that's been the case for Lance Stroll. But as Fernando, we know he maximizes whatever he can out of the car. And now with Adrian Newey, I feel like for 2026, there has to be high hopes, but at the same time there has to be high expectations. If the car is good, then we can definitely see Alonso push a fight for potential third title. I don't know, but Yeah, I mean, with the upgrades that they brought in, hopefully they can push Williams, which probably we'll talk about as well, for I think P5 and the constructors. Let's see, it's a long way, 10 races to go, and things can happen. But yeah, it'll be an interesting fight in my opinion.
You kind of given me the perfect segue there because this battle in the midfield is incredibly tight, and another team that's fighting in there is Williams, and they have been a team where I think everyone's had a slight hope in them to come back to performances of old, and at least it looks under James Vowell's helm that is possible. There's a light at the end of this tunnel, isn't there, Daniel?
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they were seeing the light at the first part of this year. They've had a kind of year of thirds, maybe even. It's like, at the start of the year, it was, whoa, Williams are really on fire this year. And then it transitioned slowly to, whoa, that Williams is actually on fire, especially in Austria with Carlos Sainz. And now it's kind of in the stage where they've stopped having those reliability issues. They've understood them. It was a cooling issue, but they've had to compromise performance as a result of fixing it. And now we want to bring back the Williams top 5 finishes, or at least Lucy does. But yeah, the drivers have, on Alex Albon's side of the garage, have been maximising. I mean, Albon says when everything goes right, they can get points on any given weekend, except maybe Hungary. And I tend to agree. He's only non-scored in his 3 DNFs in a row that he had. Bahrain, where the safety car timing meant they had to double stack and he lost out. And like I said, Hungary, where the track characteristics were definitely didn't suit that car. Just looking forward as well, I think James Vowell said that Qatar later in the year will kind of be a similar track where they might be floundering a bit in terms of pace. So I'm sure they're not looking forward to that. But Carlos Sainz on the other side, I mean, he's had a bit of a rookie season. He's had turns of speed. I mean, his highest finishing position was in the Belgium sprint. But it's been so messy and he hasn't been able to maximise the car that Williams have been given to their drivers. I mean, he struggled with combined braking, especially earlier in the year, braking and turning at the same time. He's had damage in at least 4 races, Bahrain, Miami, Spain, Silverstone. That's not even to mention he had DNF in Australia when he wasn't familiar with the throttle inputs and the way that car worked. So in his own words, an incredibly frustrating and disappointing season so far, which does not summarise the season of Williams overall, because I think they will be jubilant in this summer shutdown. They have succeeded in a lot of their goals, but maybe they will just be checking over one shoulder to Aston Martin, who are only 18 points back. A cheeky Lance Stroll second place puts them right in contention for that one.
I guess we mentioned that Albon, rightly so, has had a better season. Have we been disappointed, Vignesh, by how Sainz has performed this season? Or do we think we need to give him a little bit more time to get used to a new team?
I think so before I talk about Carlos, I think a lot of Albon deserves a lot of plaudits given how people are talking so highly about Carlos Sainz. I mean, rightfully so. He finished like he helped Ferrari finish P2 in the constructors. An argument could be made of if he could have finished a couple of races, Ferrari might have won the constructors. That's a different story altogether. But the fact that Ferrari kicked him off for Lewis Hamilton, a lot of people thought that was unfair given the form that he was in, and people expected him to. It's unfair to say, but wipe the floor with Albon, given how their racing careers have panned out in the last 4 or 5 years. And I can say a lot. I feel like Albon has shut down a lot of critique from that end. In terms of Carlos, yeah, it's been disappointing. I would definitely give him a bit more time in terms of adapting to a car, but at the same time, he's also moved around from a lot of teams, so he's known for that adaptability. So we need to find the right line of giving him enough time versus his adaptability. I feel like that is something he was always known for, like moving from team to team, McLaren, Renault, old Toro Rosso, and then Ferrari. I feel like maybe this is probably the first time he's driven a Mercedes engine, so probably he's getting used to that. As Daniel mentioned, the whole braking issues that he had at the start of the season. But 14 races in, I feel like he probably needs to step things up in terms of his own performances. When he's let down by reliability, he can't do much about it. But for the next 10 races or so, I hopefully see him try to put up better performances, more Q3 appearances when the car's performing well. Let's say Vegas, for example, where they're quick in a straight line. So if he can end the season on a high, then that's great, and hopefully catch up to Albon in terms of points. It's highly unlikely, but keeping close to Albon would definitely help them secure P5 in the constructors.
Indeed, I think that's probably the ceiling for them, right? I don't think they've got any chance of breaching that top four big teams. They've just got to make sure they can keep teams behind. And I think fifth place for a team like Williams is a very good performance. Lucy was probably up in arms about how well this season's gone so far for them. Let's go to Red Bull, which is currently in fourth, which is a crazy thing to say when they've got Max Verstappen in one of those two cars. It's been a season of two. It feels like it's crazy. The different thing of what's happened with Verstappen's side of the garage. Verstappen's ultimately a race winner this season, but 187 of the points that they have scored this season, which is isn't a very good look in any way, shape, or form on either Yuki Tsunoda or on Liam Lawson. Do we think? Obviously, I think it goes without saying, Red Bull have gone from winning the World Championship last year to not being anywhere in that discussion at all. So I think it's always going to be a underperformance from them. Is this, Daniel, I guess Vignesh as well, if you want to answer this one, is this Red Bull's worst season in Formula One since when, honestly? How long ago has it been since Red Bull's had such a bad season?
I was probably very, very young when they last had as bad a season as this one, to be honest. Probably the early days when they weren't being really taken very seriously and they were just in that building phase as a new team. But yeah, I think their downfall is almost over now. Probably when they lose that Drivers' Championship trophy at the end of the year, that's the end of Red Bull's era. Certainly in these regulations, and probably in the next ones too. So I think part of the issue is probably that Red Bull, they seem to retain staff like the 1996 Monaco Grand Prix retained functioning F1 cars. It's just not working. No, it was a mass exodus was the phrase being thrown around, and it's been like that for a long time. It continued into this year. They lost their figurehead of Christian Horner, and that was kind of the icing on the cake, if you will, for I don't know. I still think maybe Christian Horner should have gone down with that ship, but obviously if the management wanted to make the change, then they did. Obviously, Max Verstappen's maximizing that car, but it's well enough. I mean, you don't even really need to talk about any championship challenge, as you said, Anwar. Maybe the only really lost opportunity for them this year was Saudi Arabia. They could have won that race from Verstappen's side, but obviously their issues with the second driver as well just compounds all the issues they've been having.
Yeah, and I think some degree of turnover is natural when you're at the top. I think Merck have had that, but I think the fact that it's so many high leadership figures as well, the likes of Jonathan Wheatley, the likes of Adrian Newey, we've all gone away to different teams in the sport. I think it's always. I think that empire has now crumbled, as Daniel mentioned. I think this is it for Red Bull's era, and they've got to start anew. Looks to have kept their star driver in Max Verstappen, who was probably their biggest commodity at this point in terms of being able to put out results when the car isn't there for it. Vignesh, what does the future hold for Red Bull for the rest of the season, do you think? Will it be just continuous mediocre-ish results with the odd Verstappen surprise, or where do you expect to see them for the rest of the year?
I think Max has said it himself. He believes that he doesn't see Red Bull winning any races for the foreseeable future, at least this season. I kind of agree with him because, like any track we look ahead to, whether it's Vegas or Zandvoort, I feel like the Red Bull car doesn't have any strong strong abilities or strong characteristics that it can outperform the McLaren. Or even if it does, like the McLaren have far better tire management or strategy to overcome the Red Bull in terms of one particular characteristic. So Max having to fight with both his hands tied, it's an almost impossible task. At least in 2021, Like they had, even when Sergio Perez was finding his way back through the field in certain races, he actually had a decent strategy team and a decent car to fight with. Now, like it's almost with all that gone and the constant politics at play at Red Bull, it's a write-off for them for the rest of the season. All they can do is probably just, again, similar to Ferrari and Mercedes, which we'll probably talk about, is the fact that they can accumulate more win time for next year and hope and pray to God that the Ford engine isn't as bad as a as a Mercedes or a Ferrari engine for 2026. Otherwise, they're in pretty much deep waters.
Deep waters indeed. Let's move on to the next team in the list. And I think we're going to say a very similar tone for each of the next couple. I think it's fair to say that the teams behind McLaren haven't really lived up to the billing. Merck are next with 236 points. George Russell, and it's not really the fault of the drivers, I don't think. George Russell's had an unbelievable season in a car that doesn't seem like it's particularly good. So do we think Merck have underperformed with their car particularly here, Daniel, or do we think this is probably what we should have expected given their success in this set of regulations?
I just think this year's been just like the last, the three probably. I mean, they were third in the constructors in 2022, second in 2023, fourth in 24, and now they're third in 25. So they've always been hovering around that kind of area of behind the dominant cars, but not quite able to challenge them on a consistent basis. I think it's just a lack of understanding on their side, but yet blundering their way to an inconsistently decent car. That's kind of their mojo for this whole regulation set. I think they'll be glad it's coming to an end at the end of this year, frankly. Mercedes aren't there to pick up the old win like they did with George Russell. Of course, it helps, and they prefer it to none. But at the same time, it's not what they're there for. Speaking of Russell, their driver lineup is class. Kimi Antonelli's obviously been having his struggles, but George Russell has been. We mentioned it in the Hungary review. He's been getting those podiums just. Whenever anyone has a slightly off day, George Russell will be there to take a podium off them, which is great for him. And I still can't believe that his seat was potentially under threat from Max Verstappen, and he still doesn't have, as of recording, a contract signed for 2026, which is wild. And nor does Kimi Antonelli, who has had a bit of a rough season. I think he'll just enjoy this summer shutdown that we're having, because he has spoken of fatigue earlier in the year, especially after Imola, his home race. He said, maybe I committed too much to the media, to the fans, to my family and friends. So I think stepping back from the limelight and attacking again comes down for what will be useful. But, it's not like that. It's not the Constructors' Championship at stake. So it's not as crucial.
Let's move on to Ferrari, because I don't think there's much else for us to say about Merck, really. Vignesh, I'm going to let you speak about Ferrari here, because I think there's so much to talk about, really, isn't there?
Yeah, it reminds me a lot of the 2023 season in terms of the hype that was brought in terms of Lewis moving teams, as I mentioned earlier, like probably the biggest move in terms of drivers from Mercedes to Ferrari, and the fact that they had a lot of people argued, in my opinion, is the strongest driver pairing. I mean, in hindsight, probably given how they performed, it's a debate. But yeah, the suspension change was really odd given how they performed last year, despite having a little bit of a blip in the middle of 2024. They still managed to put up a decent fight with McLaren, only finishing behind them by 14 points or so. So there was hope that they would take the fight to McLaren's this year, but clearly after Australia, it was pretty much written off. And given how they've been floundering in terms of car performances, on and off, and then the issue of plank wear and the misguided updates, like they're unsure as to whether it would work or not. And the drivers having to lift and coast constantly during races, even when they're fighting for podiums or potential wins in the case of Charles Leclerc in Hungary. It's been really disappointing. Lewis losing his confidence in himself and making such crazy statements about potentially replacing him just 8 months into his Ferrari career. It clearly shows that a lot of work needs to be done. But one thing I'm I would say one positive I can take is the fact they've chosen to renew Fred Vasseurs contract. I think Ferrari at least have learned from the mistakes in the past of like constantly switching between team principals. We saw that how it ended with Mattia Rebouene and Mattia Binotto. Like changing team principals isn't the solution, and both drivers have trust in Fred, given that Fred supported them through their early part of their careers, be it Lewis Hamilton in GP2 or Charles Leclerc in Sauber. He clearly has a direction. Hopefully he's hired like decent like staff like Logster from Mercedes, and maybe some more additions would help. But I I believe they need. There's still a strong. There's still an issue of them not listening to the drivers, and hopefully they take in more input. Because at the end of the day, as much as you like try to hide the issues, like the drivers, I feel like Charles Leclerc overperforming this season has hidden a lot of the issues that Ferrari are facing, and it's a similar situation to Max Verstappen Red Bull, where towards the end of last season and this season, he's sort of outdriven the car, and he's hidden the problems that the car is facing, and they can't openly admit it because that then there will be further inspection of their car, and that could lead to like potential like disqualifications and whatnot with the blank ware issue that they had in China and recently, and potential disqualification in Hungary. In my opinion, it's been chaotic, and having at least stable management heading into 2026 is a positive that I can take, and hopefully that they just write the season off. Forget about throwing anymore. I don't. I think the Spa update was probably the last update that they have. Just scrap this car, and if any like of the suspension ideas they have for the season, if it doesn't work out in the next 10 races, please don't carry that over into the 2026 car. That's my only prayer, that they don't take any of these failed ideas they had during this regulation era into the next era and take more input from the drivers.
Indeed. Daniel, do you also agree that this is probably a write-off rest of the season for Ferrari?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like Mercedes, they don't want to be competing for the low. I mean, they are second in the Constructors' Championship, but they don't want to be competing for that. The expectation, certainly from the Tifosi side, was that they'd be challenging for the Constructors this year, and hopefully both drivers in contention in the Drivers' Championship as well, which hasn't materialised. Therefore, it is a write-off. Leclerc says he's been maximising the car. The maximum of the car is P3. So, Charles Leclerc doesn't get out of bed for a P3 normally. He gets out of bed to win Monza and Monaco and Silverstone, where he's gone well in the past, but not in the rain. And, it's been miserable. But fresh start. I mean, we're saying that a lot, to be honest. A lot of these teams need a fresh start, apart from maybe one, who I'm sure we'll get to shortly.
Yeah, let's get to it. McLaren have definitely been the strongest team by a long way. They've been competitive at every race. They've got two drivers who are incredibly evenly matched. We've got 9 points between them in a championship battle that is set to last the rest of the season. Before we get to actually anything here, Daniel, do we think that this is among the best and most consistent, one of the best team performances we've seen in a Formula One in the modern era?
Ooh, in terms of just from a team of people, maybe discounting the drivers, I'd argue yes. Well, you have to say Red Bull 2023 with Max Verstappen was probably the best single season performance from a driver and team. Obviously, honourable mentions when you're considering just the group of people to McLaren 1988 as well, when they won all but one race that season. Only exceptional circumstances could deny them the win. So on the whole, yes. I mean, there have been some mysterious circumstances like Canada where the pace just wasn't really there for them. But apart from that, they have been dominant. I mean, they've won every race out of Canada since Canada. They've had several 1-2s, and that makes me very grateful that, like you said, Anwar, these drivers are evenly matched. I mean, the best thing about it is that neither of them are generational talents, and it makes them able to look at each other's telemetry and replicate what they see when the other one's faster in a corner, for example. I mean, I think Eddie Irvine used to say that there were corners where Michael Schumacher would just do impossible things, like carrying several kph more through cops, and Irvine just could not copy it. But if Irvine was faster at any of the corners, Schumacher could copy what he was doing, and it was just total annihilation. But that's not happening here. They're learning from each other and pushing one another. That makes mistakes which we see a lot in qualifying, particularly from Norris's side, unfortunately. But it just makes such great viewing because also we're not in the dark about their dominance. Like, because they are both pushing that car to the maximum, how much of a gap they have on the rest of the field. Max Verstappen 2023 won every race, almost every race, at a jog, and we never saw him sprinting in that car. These guys are sprinting every single race. You know, they are pushing each other to wring every thousandth out of the car, which is great to watch.
It is definitely entertaining. Vignesh, who would you say has had the better season so far out of the two? Now, Piastri's got a 9-point advantage. Who do you think has had the upper hand so far, even if that upper hand is so slight?
It has to be Oscar Piastri. I feel like the number of I feel like he's made far lesser mistakes in comparison to Lando Norris, and at least in qualifying. I feel like Lando's had a couple of blunders. Saudi Arabia, the crash in Q3 in Saudi Arabia is a notable one, and the fact that Oscar's been able to take the fight to Max Verstappen in certain races. I mean, sure, in Imola he kind of got mugged into turn one, but the fact that he was able to overtake Max in Miami and then taking the fight to him and Saudi Arabia as well once again in turn one, like elbows out. I feel like that was what was missing from Lando last year. The fact that he was a bit like he was easily pushed off in turn one. I feel like he's worked on it as well, but seeing that Oscar compared to like last year, he's taken a bigger jump in terms of performance. I think last year Oscar really struggled when it came to a bit of consistency as well as maybe tire management. But the fact is this season I feel like they're almost like level in terms of tire management and his qualifying performance have been slightly better. So as a result, I'd say Oscar's definitely had the better season. But again, only just as you mentioned.
Yeah, there's not much in between the two of them. Now, we're at the mid-season, so I think it's time for a little bit of a prediction from the three of us. Who is going to be our World Championship come Abu Dhabi? Starting with you, Daniel.
McLaren. But if you're talking about the drivers, I
thought that would be pretty obvious now because of the lead they've got in the constructors.
I was like, Anwar's giving me the easy question here. Okay, drivers' championship. I think if Norris wins it, then it's got to be one of the weakest championship wins since probably, I think it was 1982 when Keke Rosberg, basically his two championship rivals had like career-ending crashes, and he just had to basically drive to the title when he only won one race that year. So yeah, Norris has made too many mistakes to clinch this for me, unless he can properly iron them out and start stamping his authority into Piastri. So I think Piastri is going to get it, but I know it's going to be close. And that's very exciting.
Yeah, I mean, we all want to see it go down to the wire. Vignesh, how about you? Where are you making your claim here?
I'm going to go in the opposite direction and back Norris. Even though Oscar has had the better season, I feel like my real knowledge might be better, but I feel like the upcoming tracks, I feel like Lando's had a advantage over Oscar over the last few years. But then again, given the jump that Oscar's had from last year to this year, it's hard to say if Norris will even do better than Piastri at those tracks. But I don't know, 10 races to go, I think it happened. So I'm going to go in the opposite direction, back Norris. In terms of the weakest champion we've had in a long time, I feel like that's a very harsh statement to make, but there's some truth to it. I'm not sure if we can go all the way back to 1982. I'm trying to think of other champions that we've had in the past. Maybe 99 with 99. Nothing against Mika Hakkinen, but wasn't Michael injured for like a decent portion of the races? I think 6 or 7 races. Michael's out. I think that was the weakest championship.
Are you talking about the one where Michael Schumacher had that crash at Silverstone and broke his legs?
Yeah, that season where he was out for a couple of races.
Yeah, and then Mika Hakkinen only had Eddie Irvine for a challenger. Yeah, that's a good shout. I mean, my only counter would be that Mika Hakkinen did the job the previous year when he was up against the Schumacher, but that Ferrari wasn't as strong that year. So yeah, it's a good shout, I guess. Maybe we don't have to go all the way back to 1982, but yeah, I just think when you look at especially the championship winners in the 21st century, and then you look at Lando Norris's season, I don't want to say it because I do like Lando Norris and I think he's a great driver, but this season has not been his best season in terms of maximizing and destroying his teammates. So, we'll have to see on that one.
Another one last one before we move on and finish this episode. Will Alpine have a fourth driver this season?
No, surely not. Frustrating as that might be for the likes of Paul Aaron, but no, I think Colapinto and the circumstance of Colapinto's involvement in that seat, not just his performances, which have been subpar, but everything that comes along with that, we already know it. I just think they're just gonna. It's like Yuki Tsunoda, he's underperforming, but there's not really a whole lot you can do about it anymore.
Vignesh, how about you? Do you expect Colapinto to get the sack or not?
No, I think he'll stay out for the rest of the season. As Danny mentioned, there's a lot of other factors at play. The fact that Alpine had to pay a large sum of money to get him out from that Williams contract, and then to put him in that position, given the backing he has from, I think, Telcel and pretty much a lot of other sponsors from Argentina, I doubt that Flavio would want to lose out on that sponsorship that he's getting from Colapinto. As much as he's been quite mediocre this season, I doubt that they would sack him for all that. And especially heading into new regulations, I don't see any reason why you should change the driver lineup. I think it's important that you keep the driver lineup you have for the next set of regulations, even though they're not as good as you expect them to be. Let's see how Colapinto does for the rest of the season. I think the next 10 races or so is pretty much what he had at Williams last year. So maybe he can find some of that form. But then again, the Alpine has been really horrible, so he may never get that opportunity to show his talent from last year. But yeah, I don't see any change, to be honest.
I think they will roll the dice, personally. I think that they, if it comes to the last 5 races and he hasn't scored any points, I don't see a reason why they wouldn't roll the dice with him and throw in a Paul Aaron or someone else of that ilk, and that they might throw someone in there. But we'll see about that. That brings us to the end.
Wait, just a second.
Go.
So you have started to make a prediction now. So I'm afraid, Anwar, since we're getting some contradiction here about whether you need to give predictions or not, I'm going to have to press you for your Drivers' World Champion of 2025, please.
Okay, right. I thought I'd get away with it. I think that Oscar Piastri has shown enough consistency and pace to win the World Championship. I think he will be the one who. I think it will go down to Abu Dhabi, but I think he will take it. So I'm going to say Oscar Piastri. I'm going to lean with, like you, Daniel, and say that. But I don't think it will be a case of Norris will drop the ball or bottle it in any way. I think it's just going to be Piastri's got the pace. Because I think that's something that he's shown over the course of the season, that he has got that now. And that was something that I think it was lazy analysis to say Norris has got the better raw pace. I don't think that's true anymore. So I would go in the Australians' favour, which would suck for Norris, because I think this is his probably best opportunity to do so. But I think that's the way it's going to play out. We'll see if those age like milk when we get back to Abu Dhabi. But that brings us to the end of this episode of the Warwick F1 show. A bit of a long one, so I appreciate everyone sticking around. I want to thank all 3 of my guests from this episode, Daniel, Vignesh, and Lucy, who had to go midway through, but thanks to her regardless for coming on. We will be back at some point later where we go through. We've got a few more episodes in the summer shutdown plan, so an F1 movie episode related one coming through. So we'll see how that plays out, and we'll get back to you soon. So I've been your host, Anwar. I want to thank Daniel and Vignesh for coming on, and Lucy as well. And I'll see you in the next episode. Goodbye.